Test. Good evening. Everybody doing okay? Judges chapter 17 is where we're going to be this evening. Judges 17. These, I'll kind of introduce it a little bit, and then I'll lead us in prayer. But I was going to tell you these last 5 chapters, we only have 5 chapters left in Judges, and these last 5 chapters are different. They are not chronological. They don't fit the story right after Samson chronologically. These are kind of like an appendix, I guess you could say, to the book of Judges. And it kind of gives us a little bit of insight of what the time was like during the period of Judges, how bad it was morally, spiritually. And so it's like the author of the book of Judges adds these 5 chapters at the very end to give us some insight as to, really how bad it was. And so we get to look at a couple of stories of some individuals that we really don't know anything about. We don't know much about these people, but we get to see how wicked individual people were back then during the time of the Judges. And so these 5 chapters are going to tell us really 2 stories. The first story is in Judges 17 and 18, which is what we'll look at tonight. The second story is in Judges 19, 20, and 21. We'll look at next Wednesday. Now we can do it tomorrow if y'all want, but we'll wait till next Wednesday, and then we'll be through with the book of Judges. But I'll explain as we go where the evidence is that this is probably that this is not in chronological order. That most likely what we're about to read actually took place at the very beginning of the book of Judges, maybe even before the first judge, Othniel, that we read about at the beginning of the book. Let me pray, and then we'll begin looking at the story. Father, we thank you for letting us come together this evening and just open up your word and begin to study. And Father, help us to gain insight from your word tonight, from these 2 chapters in the book of Judges that are mostly ignored, rarely taught from, if rarely ever preached from. But Father, we know that it's here for a reason. Your word is, you've preserved it for us to learn from. And so I pray that you'll help us to do that, and we'll apply it in our lives. And it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. So these 2 remaining stories and these 5 chapters, I don't know that I've ever heard a sermon on any of them, any of these 5 chapters, or Bible study on any of these 5 chapters. Maybe you have, but I haven't. But these 5 chapters, these 2 stories and these 5 chapters are going to teach us what happens when you turn away from the authority of the Word of God, and you begin to experience a lot of religious anarchy, if you will. It shows what happens when you begin to live your life without God giving direction in your life. And we see that in these stories. Now, the first story, like I said, is in chapters 17 and 18. There are 3 scenes that we'll look at. And what's interesting is after each scene is this statement, in those days there was no king. And so that lets us know, again, the climate. There was no king. And in the first time it says that every man did what he was right in his own eyes. So again, that tells us a little bit about what's happening during this time. But one of the things we'll learn from this is that belief determines behavior. And that's one of the things I've been trying to emphasize on Sunday mornings as we go through 1 Thessalonians, is that what you believe matters because it determines how you behave, or at least it should determine how you behave. And we'll see that with these individuals in the story that we're going to read about tonight. So beginning with this first story, let's look at verse 1. It says, "Now there was a man in the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah, Let's stop there. Ephraim was in the middle of the country. It was not far from a place called Shiloh. We haven't talked a lot about Shiloh, but if you'll remember, Shiloh is where the tabernacle is located. And that's important for our story because the tabernacle is where you go to worship God. That's where you go to make your sacrifices. If you want to go and get some advice from the Levites, the priest, or some direction, you go to Shiloh. So this man, verse 1, whose name is Micah, lives in Ephraim, which is not far from Shiloh. That's important. Now, his name's Micah, and that's a great name to have. His name means who is like the Lord, or more correctly, who is like Yahweh. Well, he's not, okay? He doesn't live up to the character of his name. Don't get him mixed up with the other Micah, the prophet Micah. So there's multiple Micahs, so don't get him mixed up. But he does not live up to the character of his name. Let me ask you, do you live up to the character of your name? You know, you named the name of Christ, right? You belong to Christ. You're a Christian. So do you live up to the character of your name? Well, this guy certainly doesn't. He lives a very ungodly, unlike God life, and we'll see that in this story. So verse 2, now listen to this. He said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver which were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse in my hearing, behold, the silver is with me. I took it. And his mother said, blessed be my son by the Lord. Okay, if that should sound a little confusing, if that's the first time you read it. So here's what's happened is he has stolen from his mother. By the way, this is a grown man. And you'll realize that in a moment because he has a grown son he'll do something with here in a moment that's wrong as well. But he's a grown man, and now he's stealing from his mother. He's stolen from her. In my Bible, it's 1,100 pieces of silver, which is about 28 pounds of silver, which would have been about 100 years' worth of wages for the average person. So she was very wealthy, and he would have been able to live for a very long time on this amount of money. So he stole this from his mom, and then his mom cursed, because she doesn't know who stole it. She cursed the thief. And I'm assuming he heard her curse the thief. And maybe she said something like, I cursed the man who took my money and, may his head fall off. Or may all his kids die. Or so he heard it. And, of course, he's superstitious. So he's like, okay, Mom, hang on. Before you finish up that curse there, I took your money. I have the silver. I'm the one who took it. Now, notice what she does at the end. She says, oh, blessed be my son. God bless you, son. Well, no wonder he stole it. You can tell right there how she raised the boy, right? Every time he did something wrong, oh, it's okay. God bless you, son. There's no problem here with that. And so he grew up to be this wicked man who even steals everything his mom has later on in life. So don't discipline your kids. They'll grow into monsters for sure. So he hears this curse and he admits to stealing this silver from his mom. And she says, oh, okay, well, it's fine. God bless you. She doesn't want this curse to have its way on him. So verse 3, it says, he then returned the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, I wholly dedicate the silver from my hand. So she's wanting to dedicate all of it to who? To the Lord, to Yahweh. Okay, that sounds like a good thing, but watch what happens. She says, I wholly dedicate the silver, all the silver from my hand to Yahweh for my son to do what? To make a graven image and a molten image. Now, therefore, I will return them to you. So he gives her the silver back. She hands it back to him and says, I want to dedicate all this to the Lord God, Yahweh. Take it and make some idols with it. Because, God's into idols, right? Okay. So verse 4. So when he returned the silver to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave them to the silversmith, who made them into a graven image and molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. Okay. couple of issues, couple of problems here so far. She said she was going to give all of it to the Lord, but how much did she give? 200, about a fifth of it, right? So she made this this commitment. I'm going to give everything to the Lord, but instead she just, well, I'll give 200. And kind of reminds you of the story of Ananias and Sapphira, right? Remember their story? They sold land, when the church first got started, they sold some of their property, and they said, we're going to give all the money to the church. Now, they didn't have to do it. They volunteered to do it. But they made a big deal out of it, and then they didn't give all the money to the church. They just gave some of it, but they said it was all of it because they wanted to look more spiritual than they really were, and they got in trouble for it. Well, they died because of it. It reminds me of that story. She's saying, I'm going to wholly give all this to the Lord, but she doesn't do it. So she takes 200 pieces of the silver, gives to this silversmith, and notice she makes a graven image and a molten image. So we got two different images. One of them is probably made carved out of wood or stone, and then it's silver plated. And then the other one is melted silver that's poured into a mold, and it's solid. And so now Micah, at the end of verse 3, it says they were in his house, so he makes a shrine. So he has a shrine built for these two images so that he can worship these false gods, I guess, if you will. Now, here's what I want you to do, because I thought this was interesting. We've only read the first 4 verses. How many commandments have they broken? So real quick, just real quick, keep your place right here, but turn to Exodus 20 for just a moment, and let's read the 10 Commandments. In Exodus chapter 20. And let's just kind of go through and let's see how many commandments they've broken in 4 verses. So Exodus chapter 20, verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. There's 1. You shall not make for yourself an idol. There's 2. If you'll drop down to verse 7, here's the next one. It says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. I don't know if it's pushing it or not, but who did she used the Lord's name when she said she was going to dedicate all that silver, right? That could be using the Lord's name in vain. So we've broken that one. Okay, verse 8 through about verse 11 is about the Sabbath, so we don't have anything there. How about verse 12? Honor your father and your mother. He dishonored her, didn't he? By taking her silver. You shall not, murder, commit adultery. Okay, you shall not steal. He's broken that one. Let's see, verse 17, you shall not covet. He probably coveted that, right, before he stole it. So, I don't know, was anybody counting? 6. So they broke 6 of the 10 commandments in the first 4 verses of Judges chapter 17. So we're not off to a great start, right? And that's just mom and the son. Again, that gives you an idea of how wicked the society is during the time of the judges. So, but look at verse 6. And verse 6 is that summary statement that we have 3 times in these stories. It says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. And everybody was. Everybody was just doing whatever they wanted to do, and you see that in these first 4 verses. Well, actually, I just read the first 4, right? I skipped 5. Verse 5 says, and the man Micah had a shrine. So most likely he had more than just these 2 images, but at least these 2, and he had a shrine. He made an ephod. You remember the high priest had the garment, the ephod, right? So he made one of these, and household idols, and consecrated one of his sons that he might become a priest. So he's just created a whole religious system, right? He's now remember, he lives in Ephraim, so he's an Ephraimite. That's the tribe he's from. He's from the tribe of Ephraim. So what tribe did the priest come from? Levi, right? So his son can't be, he's not qualified to be a priest. And he's certainly not in this false religious system that he's just invented for his own house. But so in his house, he has a shrine. He's created these false gods. He's ordained a son to be a priest for the, and remember, where's Shiloh? It's just down the road. The tabernacle's just down the road, and he can just go right down the road and worship God if he wants. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he's doing this. Again, verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Okay, so that's scene one in this story. Scene two starts in verse 7, and it doesn't get any better. It says, now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he was staying there. So let me read verse 8. It says, then the man departed from the city of from Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he might find a place. And as he made his journey, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. So here's a young man, a Levite. We're not told his name or his background yet. We will here in a moment. But he's from Bethlehem, and we learned that he is a Levite. Now, here's what's interesting. And I know I had to look this up. I didn't remember this. Maybe you remember this. Remember, Levites, Bethlehem was not a Levitical city. Remember, there were only certain cities that were given to the priests, because all the 12 tribes, except for Levi, the tribe of Levi, they didn't get an actual inheritance, a piece of land. The priestly tribe got cities. Y'all remember that? Bethlehem was not one of them. This guy's not living in the right city. But it appears when I read those two verses, like he's kind of wandering around. He's kind of looking for something. He's looking for, I don't know, maybe a more exciting life than that of being part of a priestly tribe, looking for what's maybe something that's better, if you will. So verse 9, Micah says to him, because he ends up at Micah's house, where do you come from? And he said to him, I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to stay wherever I may find a place. And Micah then said to him, dwell with me and be a father and a priest to me, and I'll give you 10 pieces of silver a year, a suitcase or a suit of clothes, and your maintenance. And so the Levite went with him. So Micah meets this guy that's a Levite. He thinks, oh, he can be my priest, and I'll make him the priest over my false religious system I have in my house where this shrine is built. And so he says, look, I'll give you all the food you need. I'll pay you. I'll take care of everything that needs to be taken care of. And apparently this guy's not happy with what he's doing, so he says, I'll do it. Okay, here's the thing. We're going to find out about him in just a moment. Now, not every Levite can actually be a priest. You have to be a direct descendant of Aaron, okay? Now, Levites had a couple different, remember Korah? Korah was a Levite, but he wasn't a direct descendant of Aaron. Korah tried to be a priest, and remember, God opened up the ground and swallowed Korah and all those who were following him. So not every Levite can be a priest. Now, if you were part of the Levite clan or Levite family and not a direct descendant of Aaron, you would still help and assist the priest. You would like they had special duties when it came to carrying the tabernacle. Some of them would carry the cloth, some of them would carry the poles, some would carry the ark, and then some were the priests. Y'all remember that when we went through all of that? So this guy, we'll read it in a moment. I don't want to get there yet because I don't want to spoil it. But he's not qualified to be an actual priest. Now he can assist a priest, but he can't be a priest. But now he's got his opportunity, I guess you could say, to be a priest. And so he's doing that. It appears that he's kind of in it more for the money than he is for anything else. And we'll see that it really kind of confirmed that here in a moment when we get to chapter 18. Verse 11, or what verse are we in? Verse 11. The Levite agreed to live with the man, and the young man became to him like one of his sons. And so Micah consecrated the Levite. What business did he have doing that? And the young man became his priest and lived in the house of Micah. And Micah said, now I know that the Lord will prosper me, seeing I have a Levite as priest. You see how mixed up in the head this guy was? He was kind of superstitious, I guess you could say. He had all of his religious systems mixed up. He thought, okay, I can worship these false gods, but I've got a Levite here, and maybe God will bless me since I have a Levite, one of his priests, or one of his that could be a priest possibly here with me. But as we'll see, it doesn't work out for him at all. He's deceived, if you will. Okay. But notice, again, at verse 18, this is the second time the statement comes up. In those days, there was no king. right? So that kind of ends each of the scenes, I guess you could say. So chapter 18, here we are. We've got the next scene, the third scene of this first story, if you will. So verse 1, it says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for themselves to live in, for until that day an inheritance had not been allotted to them as a possession among the tribes of Israel. Now stop there for a second. We're talking about the tribe of Dan. Remember last week we just studied about Samson, and he was from the tribe of Dan. Y'all remember that? Now, what's interesting is it says the Danites are seeking an inheritance for themselves because one had not been allotted to them. Yes, one had been allotted to them, they just didn't take it. They had been given an allotment of land, in fact, a good allotment of land in the southern part of Israel, in Judah. It wasn't down in the desert. It wasn't like it was a bad piece of land. If modern day reference point would be Tel Aviv, where the modern airport is, Tel Aviv and Joppa, all the way out to the coast. The coastal plain, very beautiful part of Israel, was their strip of land or their inheritance that they were supposed to take, but they never conquered the Philistines. They never took it. They were commanded to take the land, and they never conquered the Philistines, and so they never had peace in the land. So now they're looking to take another piece of land from somewhere else. That's what they're doing. And I'll show you on your maps here in just a moment what I'm talking about. But they're looking for another piece of land. They just didn't do what God told them to do. They were supposed to occupy that piece of land. They just never did it. Verse 2, the sons of Dan sent from their family 5 men out of their whole number, valiant men from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said to them, go search the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. So they leave the land that they're supposed to be occupying, but they're under the oppression of the Philistines. And they're headed up north looking for a piece of land. And these are 5 guys that are going to spy. And they stop overnight by Micah's house. Now, these 5 spies kind of reminds me of when they sent the 12 spies into the promised land. Y'all remember that? Except God was giving them this land. Nobody's given Dan the land that they're fixing to take, but they're sending these spies into this town that they're going to end up slaughtering all these people in and taking the land. Verse 3, it says, when they were near the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young man, the Levite. Why they recognized his voice, I don't know, but they recognized his voice. And I have one suspicion, but we'll get to it in a moment. And they turned aside there and said to him, who brought you here? And what are you doing in this place? And what do you have here? And he said to them, thus and so has Micah done to me. So he tells them the story. He's hired me, and I've become his priest. They said to him, inquire of God, please, that we may know whether our way on which we're going will be prosperous. And the priest said to them, go in peace. Your way in which you are going has the Lord's approval. Whatever. Remember, they're not far from Shiloh. They could have just gone on down the road another 5 miles or so, and they could have been at the tabernacle and actually talked to real priests, possibly even the high priest who had the Urim and the Thummim in his ephod, and he could have actually inquired of God if this was blessed by them, but they didn't do that. They're asking this false priest if this has the Lord's approval. So, verse 7, it says, then the 5 men departed. So they leave and they go to Laish. This is the town that they're going to take. And they saw the people who were living in it securely after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. So in other words, they're living in security. They're down in this valley. It's not far from Sidon, which is on the coast of Israel. That's who's kind of keeping them secure. It says, for there was no ruler humiliating them. Nobody was like, they didn't have a king there watching over them for anything in the land. And they were far from the Sidonians. So even the Sidonians who secured them were kind of a ways away, had no dealings with anyone. All right, now let me show you where this is. If you'll go to your maps in the back of your Bible, and everybody should have one map that says something about the 12 tribes of Israel, like the inheritance or something like that. And it should be a map of Israel, all kinds of different colors with all the names of the 12 tribes in all these different locations. Everybody have a map like that? Or maybe hopefully you're sitting by somebody that does. Okay. All right. So if you'll look right in the middle of the country, or actually if you'll go down the coast of Israel and about middle ways down, do you have a place called Joppa? If you find Joppa, is it in Dan? Do you have Dan colored in there? Okay, that's the place God gave them. That was their inheritance. That's where they were supposed to be. And that's where these 5 men came from. And look, they went north, see Ephraim. That's where Ephraim is where this guy Micah lives. So they come up and they meet him. Notice where Shiloh is. Ephraim, right? Okay, so they leave this area called Dan. This is the area that God gave them. It's just they never conquered the Philistines, so they hate living there. So they're going to go take another piece of land. So they leave Ephraim and they go all the way up. Now go all the way to the very far north and find Mount Hermon. You find Mount Hermon? Now just south of Mount Hermon, you'll find a place called Dan. Okay, it wasn't called Dan. It was originally called Laish. This is the city we're just read about, called Laish. The reason why it's called Dan on that map is because they kill everybody, rebuild it, and they name it Dan. Y'all see that? Okay, that's where they end up going. And this is important in Israel's history. We'll talk about it some more in a moment. But here's what's interesting. If you ever go to Israel, we didn't get to go there, but a lot of groups, in fact, Josh went there because I saw his pictures. But Josh went to Dan, and one of the oldest gates in the world, city gates in the world, is there still standing. In fact, Abraham walked through that gate, and you can stand under that gate today, the same gate that Abraham walked under. And they've also found places in Dan where they believe one of the golden calves was stood, because this is where one of the golden calves was placed during the Northern Kingdom period, when there was a Northern Kingdom and a Southern Kingdom. But Josh actually has pictures. He's standing, I think, under the gate in one of his pictures. But it's an interesting place. We didn't get to go there, but he went there. But this is where they're going. This is not their land, but they're going to take that land. So let's go back to our text. Verse 8. It says, when they came back to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol. So now they've come all the way back down to that area called that was supposed to be their inheritance. They said to them, what do you report? They said, arise and let us go up against them, for we've seen the land, and behold, it is very good, and excuse me, and you will sit still. I don't know why I can't read tonight. But do not delay to go, to enter, to possess the land. When you enter, you'll come to a secure people with spacious land, for God has given it into your hand, a place where there is no lack or anything that is on the earth. So it's a great piece of land. It's a wonderful piece of land. It's beautiful up there in the hills and the mountains, plenty of water. Actually snows up that way, if you can believe it or not. Verse 12. Or verse 11, it says, then from the family of the Danites, the tribe of Dan, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, 600 men armed with weapons of war set out. They went up and camped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah, and therefore they called that place, whatever that is, you can pronounce it if you want. To this day, behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. They passed from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. He must have lived on the corner, right? I mean, right in the middle of the main intersection of the town, because they end up back at his house. Now, here's what's interesting. It says the 5 men who went to spy out the country of Laish said to their kinsmen, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod and household idols and a graven image and a molten image? Now, therefore, consider what you should do. So he's letting them know, hey, this guy's got a shrine set up at his house with these little false gods you should know about. Verse 15, they turned aside there and came to the house of the young man, the Levite, to the house of Micah, and asked him of his welfare. The 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were of the sons of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Now the 5 men who went to spy out the land went up and entered there and took the graven image and the ephod and household idols and the molten image, while the priest stood by the entrance of the gate with 600 men armed with weapons of war. So they're not asking, they're robbing, right? They've got 600 armed robbers, and they're taking this man's, all of his false gods. When these, verse 18, when these went into Micah's house and took the graven image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Be silent, put your hand over your mouth, and come with us, and be to us a father and a priest." And look at this, look at how they make this offer to him. It's better for you to be a priest to the house of, or is it better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or a priest to a tribe and a family of Israel? You see the offer? Remember this guy, he's in it for the money anyway, right? And so they know how to get him. They're like, is it better just to be a priest of one man or be the priest of a big church, right? Thousands of people. So verse 20, the priest's heart was glad. Of course it was. And he took the ephod and household idols, the graven images, and went among the people. So, he immediately went with these folks because he wanted the money, the fame, that sort of thing. Verse 21, then they turned and departed and put the little ones and the livestock and the valuables in front of them. And I know that sounds weird, but you got to imagine, here's this whole tribe of Dan, and they've got an army, 600 armed men. They put all the women and the children and the valuables up front. And the reason why they do that is because usually when they're attacked from the rear. And so they put all the, anybody that's vulnerable in the front and the men who are armed in the rear, because that's where they would usually be attacked from. And so that's what that's about. Verse 21, it says, then they turned and departed and or verse 22, when they had gone some distance from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house assembled and overtook the sons of Dan. So now Micah and his buddies are going after him, thinking they're going to get his stuff back. Verse 23, they cried to the sons of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you have assembled together?" Dumb question, right? Why are you coming? Well, you know why we're coming after you. You just stole everything out of my house. Verse 24, he said, "You've taken away my gods, which I made." Now get this verse. "You've taken away my gods, which I've made." You stole my gods. And I need to rescue my gods. You get the silliness of that? So you stole the gods that I made and the priest and have gone away. And what do I have besides? So how can you say to me, what is the matter with you? But how stupid is that? You're going to worship something you had to make to begin with, and you're going to worship something you've got to now rescue because it can't even rescue itself, but you think it's going to rescue you and take care of you. That's pretty stupid, isn't it? And that's what is meant in Psalm. Let me find this. I know I wrote this down in my notes. Psalm 115, listen to verses 4 through 7. God says, "Their idols are silver and gold, the work of a man's hand. They have mouths, but they cannot speak. They have eyes, but they cannot see. They have ears, but they cannot hear. They have noses, but they cannot smell. They have hands, but they cannot feel. They have feet, but they cannot walk. They cannot make a sound with their throats." That's just dumb idols, is all that they are. So it's pretty stupid for this man to be worshiping these, especially when the real God can be worshiped at the tabernacle just down the road from where he is. So verse 20, what verse am I in? Oh, 25. The sons of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, or else fierce men will fall upon you, and you'll lose your life with the lives of your household." So in other words, shut up and leave, or we'll kill you and everybody with you. Verse 26, so the sons of Dan went on their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house and probably cried to his mama, right? And she probably said, "God bless you," right? Gave him another 200 pounds of silver or pieces of silver and let him go on because he was a spoiled brat. Verse 27, Then they took what Micah had made and the priest, and that's something else. Here they are. Now they're relying on gods that they stole. If you got to steal a god, thinking that God's going to do something for you, how good can he be if you can steal him? If you can kidnap him, how strong can he be? Then they took what Micah, verse 27, had made in the priest who had belonged to him, and came to Laish, to a people quiet and secure, and struck, look at this, they struck them with the edge of the sword, and they burned the city with fire. So they killed everybody in the city, burned it, rebuilt it. Verse 28, and there was no one to deliver them because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone, and it was in a valley which is near Beth-Rehab, and they rebuilt the city and lived in it. So this town was down in a valley. They thought was secure because the Sidonians would take care of them, but they were too far away and it was too late. Verse 29, they called the name of the city what? Dan. That's why it's on your map as Dan. And after the name Dan, their father, the father of their tribe, who was born in Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. Verse 30, the sons of Dan set up for themselves the graven image. All right, now stop there. So they rebuild this city and they set up a shrine. Okay, so they set up a shrine. Now, Jonathan, first time we've heard somebody's name in this whole thing, isn't it? So Jonathan, the son of Gershon, the son of, my Bible says Manasseh, but what's your Bible say? Moses, and Moses is correct. Okay, so we've got Jonathan, the son of Gershon, so he's the grandson of Moses. He and his sons, so him and all his descendants, his sons, the male descendants, were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity. In other words, until the Assyrians came and carried them away into captivity. So let's stop here for a second. So for the first time, we have a character. Well, he's not the first one named. Micah's named, but first time he's named. His identity is given to us. So he's Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses. Now his identity really adds great significance to the story. And this might be why the Danites, remember they said they recognized him? Okay, I told you Bible scholars believe that this story actually happened at the very beginning of Judges. It's not chronological. Probably within 100 years of entering the promised land. And so this guy is probably the grandson of Moses. A lot of Bible scholars believe this guy is the grandson of Moses. That's why they recognized him. That's why they knew him. But what's ironic is here you have the lawgiver, the man who gave the 10 Commandments, the man who said, don't make graven images and worship false gods. You have his grandson doing what? A priest of doing all these things that he said not to do. And all of his descendants, his sons after him, who are doing the same thing. And they're going to continue to lead the tribe of Dan in this idolatry until 722 BC. You remember Israel eventually splits. They divide. There's northern kingdom and southern kingdom. And in the northern kingdom, the Assyrians come and destroy them and carry them into captivity. So until that happens, his sons, this man's descendants, continue to be a priest of idol worship for the tribe of Dan. Now that's significant. It's important for a couple of reasons. I want you to turn to Genesis 49 for just a moment. And I want to show you something interesting because there's a prophecy about Dan in Genesis 49. So there's only 50 chapters in Genesis, so it's just next to the last chapter. But in Genesis 49, Jacob's on his deathbed, and he's calling each of his 12 sons over, one at a time, in chronological order, from the oldest to the youngest. And he's blessing them or cursing them, because there's a couple of them that were not good sons. And so in verse 16, he gets to Dan. So chapter 49, verse 16. And he says, Dan will judge his people, right? Well, the name Dan means judge in Hebrew, or it means justice. A lot of people think that that's a prophecy, and the fulfillment of that is Samson. Samson was a Danite, and he judged his people. So that may have been a fulfillment of that prophecy. But look at verse 17. It says, Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a horned snake in the path that bites the horse's heel, so that his riders falls backwards. Now that sounds negative, right? Okay, most scholars, most Bible teachers think that is a curse, a negative prophecy about the tribe of Dan. They're the first tribe to go into complete idolatry. We just read it, okay? They're the first tribe out of the 12 tribes to go into complete idolatry. Now, later on, as I just mentioned a moment ago, Israel will enter into a period of time that's called the kingdom period. This is the time of the judges. So they come out of Egypt, they wander in the wilderness, and when they enter the promised land, that's the time of the judges, okay? They get into the time of the judges. And then after the 400 years of judges, they go into the time of the kings. They ask for a king. Who's their first king? Samuel. I'm sorry, Samuel was the last judge, prophet, really. So Saul's the first king. David's the second king. David's son, Solomon's the third king, and then the kingdom splits. And I always get their names mixed up, but Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, takes the southern kingdom, and Jeroboam takes the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom has Jerusalem in it. It's the tribe of Judah and Benjamin. There's 2 tribes. And the northern kingdom has the other 10 tribes in it, including the tribe of Dan. And so the tribe of Dan ends up setting up those 2 golden calves. One is in Dan, where I showed you on the map. The other is down south. And the whole purpose of the 2 golden calves is they didn't want the people in the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom to go to Jerusalem to worship. They said, you don't need to go there. You can worship in our territory, and you can worship these golden calves. So they end up leading Israel into complete and total idolatry, spiritual idolatry. And a lot of people think that that's a prophecy concerning that. Now, what's interesting is when we get to 1 Chronicles, and by the way, we will, Brad asked me about it tonight. He said when they first started coming to church here, we were in 1 Samuel. And when we started our study in the Old Testament, I don't know why, I said, let's go to 1 Samuel. So we stayed 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. And I said, why don't we just go back to Genesis and start and just go through. So he asked me, when we get through Ruth, are we going to do 1st and 2nd? No, I'm not doing it again. We'll go to Chronicles, okay? So we're going to jump to 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But here's the interesting thing. When you get to 1st Chronicles and we start getting the listing of the families of the 12 tribes, Dan is left out. Dan's left out there. He's mentioned only by geographical location, but he's left out. Now, let me show you something else. Turn to Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7. And here's a familiar passage. In Revelation chapter 7, God seals 144,000 Jewish witnesses during the tribulation, and there are 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. But somebody's left out. So if you're in Revelation chapter 7, verse 4, it says, I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. Now look, verses 5, 6, 7, and 8, 4 verses. There are 3 tribes in each verses. 3 times 4 is 12, right? Okay. So in verse 5, we have the tribe of Judah. And I'm not going to read it because every one of them says 12,000 were sealed. We have the tribe of Judah. In the middle, we have Reuben. And in the third one in that verse is Gad. Y'all see that? Verse 6, we have 3 more. Asher, Naphtali, and Manasseh. Verse 7, we have 3 more. Simeon, Levi, Issachar. In verse 8, we have 3 more. Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. No Dan. You say, well, how can there be 12 if Dan's left out? It's a good question. Joseph. Y'all remember Joseph, right? Joseph was the one who went to Egypt first and saved his family. Joseph had 2 sons while he was in Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim. So what happened when Jacob in chapter 49 was on his deathbed, instead of bringing Joseph over and blessing him, he brings his 2 sons over and blesses them and adopts them as his 2 sons, okay? And so when you get to that map we looked at a while ago of the tribes of Israel, there's no Joseph. You can't find a piece of land that says Joseph. But you'll find two pieces of land, one for Ephraim and one for Manasseh, because they became the two sons of Jacob. So whenever you start reading through the list of the 12 tribes of Israel, a lot of times there's differences. And you're like, well, why is it a little different? Well, because sometimes Joseph will be listed. Sometimes his two sons will be listed. And like here, for example, you have Dan is out, Joseph's in, and one of his sons is in. Did you get that back in verse 6? Manasseh is in. So Manasseh's in, Joseph's in. Well, you say, well, what about his other son, Ephraim? Well, he's the son of Joseph, so he's in automatically anyway. All right, I know all that's confusing, but here's the point. Why is Dan left out? We have 144,000 Jews who will be alive during the tribulation, that God will specifically seal and protect, and nobody can touch. They cannot be hurt, they cannot be killed, they cannot be touched. But no one from the tribe of Dan will be protected. They're not promised protection from God. Now, the theological question is why? But we don't have an answer in the Bible, so the best answer that I know of is because they led Israel into spiritual idolatry, and so God's not going to protect them in the tribulation. I don't know of any other reason why they would be left off. In fact, they're left out beginning in Chronicles pretty much from then on. But that's the theory, or the theory I have for no Dan in the 144,000. Okay. That's all I've got. We'll stop there. We'll save the other story. There's one more story left in Judges in the final 3 chapters. And it's a weird story. And you'll know why. You've never had Bible studies on it, but we'll do it. That's the thing about going verse by verse through the Bible, right? You don't get to skip the hard stuff, although there are times I wish I could. You have your prayer sheets? Anything we need to update? Did Luann get to go home? Good. Okay, so Luann's home, doing well. Do what? Okay, yeah, she's in a lot of pain from surgery, so keep her in prayer. Anything else? Karen Massey family, son committed suicide. So y'all keep her in prayer, the Massey family in prayer. Any others? Yes, sir. David Patilla. Okay, anything else? Yes, sir. Okay, that's BC Bowers, Clyde Bowers. Some of you may know Doug. He's city manager at Nash. Good friend of mine I grew up with. This is his dad. He's been in, is he still at the rehab place or is he in the hospital?
Back in rehab as of today.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Is he still city judge? Is he still doing it? Okay. So y'all keep Mr. Bowers in prayer if you would. Health issues. They can't figure out what's going on with him. One, they can't get his sugar regulated. Another. Yes, he's filled in for me a lot years ago. Mm-hmm. He sure did. Yeah, when we first came out here and I was still going through treatment, he filled in for me quite a bit. Yeah, it's been a long time, but Any others? Y'all keep Caleb and Olivia in prayer. They're going to LA. He's got a contract to do a STEM program out there. So he'll be gone for about 2.5 weeks.